Hi, my name is Denisha Merriweather, and our new co-host of the Black Minds Matter podcast, Briana Gilchrist. Yay! I'm
Hi.
so happy to have you. And we'll do an intro with you later, but let's just hop right in. Today, for our Black Minds Matter episode, we're going to be talking about fighting outside the ring and how charter schools, in their founding documents, is to create more innovation in the traditional public school space, and that impact. And so, a study found that Black students who went to charter schools were more likely than their peers who went to a traditional public school to have higher academic gains. And I think that that speaks to such the remarkable work of the charter school sector. And so in this episode, we have charter school expert Ron Rice. Thank you so much for being a part. You've definitely been in this fight for so long, and Briana and I are trying to, we're gonna come for your jobs one day, comfort. And so thank you so much. Your service in Newark, New Jersey, and now in Washington, D.C. at the National Alliance for Charter Schools. Thanks so much for being part. So let's just jump right into it. What brought you into the charter space? Like how did that come to be?
So, thanks for having me. I agree, Black Minds Matter, and this is an important vehicle, and I'm glad to be here to be a part of it. So education for me has always been an issue. Ever since I was a student in Newark, I'm a third generation Newarker. I attended public schools and traditional public schools for a number of years. I was Alexander Street School, and I was bused to Speedway Avenue School, and then I was bused to Harriet Tubman because we had overcrowding in schools. And I was what you call one of these smart kids who wasn't challenged. I got into the city's gifted and talented program in Newark, which was a citywide sort of motto at that time. Was bored, was not challenged. My parents sacrificed to put me into a private school. But when I took the entrance exam, I was 2 years deficient in math and 1 year, and on average for reading. And that's from somebody who was an A student in Newark Public Schools. So I recognized that there was a difference of education that some people who had money and lived in different zip codes had than what I had. So when I went to school and I got my law school degree from Seton Hall Law, I started working with the the New Jersey Department of Education, on the Abbott v. Burke decision implementation. And that was a state Supreme Court decision that actually equalized funding for the 31 special needs districts like Newark and East Orange and Irvington to get as much money per pupil as their rich counterparts in some of the richest neighborhoods and counties and school districts throughout the state of New Jersey. But what I saw was extra money into a system that was not working, did not change the parameters and did not change what was necessary for kids. I met this skinny, light-skinned, bald-haired guy named Cory Booker who wanted to challenge the politics of the city of Newark and the state of New Jersey. I happily joined on as the next generation of leadership. And we recognized that as a district that was under state control, we had to do something radical to change the trajectory of students and what public school looked like. And so what you saw was an investment, not just in charter schools, but in what was working in traditional district schools. And what you saw was a growth of incredibly good and nimble and high quality charter schools. And to be frank with you, a closing of really bad ones that weren't serving our kids. But what that has done is moved the trajectory of public education where good schools lifted all boats in the city of Newark. And now Newark is one of the districts that are high poverty, but high quality in terms of outcomes and performances for kids, like #1 school district in the nation. And it's because of charter schools. And we should be unbridled in saying that, because that's what the data says, that where neighborhoods had no options, no real quality public school options, charter schools have filled that gap in many neighborhoods throughout the city of Newark. Anybody that would say otherwise is just not telling the truth.
All right. Okay.
So I'm coming right in hot.
I see. We jump right in, and that's what I like to hear, especially because I'm one of those students who attended a public charter school in the city of Newark. So first of all, thank you for all the work that you've done. And I just want to take a step to really talk about what did the landscape. So you mentioned that you joined hands with Mayor Cory Booker at the time and decided to do this radical shift to really change what public education looked like in the city of Newark, primarily because of your personal experience. Like, you noticed the injustices. But take me back to what it looked like during that time when you decided to join this movement with him. What was the city's response to it? I mean, now we can think about the changes 20 years later, but during that day and time, all those years ago, what were they saying? What did it look like? Were people receptive to it? Just a little bit about the history of like how charter schools began in Newark and where we stand now.
It was a war. Much like what happened in Washington, D.C. when Michelle Reed came in and really transformed the landscape in Washington, where in D.C. now you have 50-50, it's close to 50% charter and 50% traditional public schools. Newark is on track to be 40% charter in the next few years, next 4 years, I believe. So it's almost a 50-50 split. But it was a war because, it's like a catch-22. Like, no one in the city of Newark liked what was going on in traditional schools. It was almost unanimous consent among parents. They were not happy with the choices they had. But then they looked at charter schools like, well, we don't want that either. And it was because it was a challenge to the way people had looked at education delivery systems in the past. There was and there still remains, a very rooted and old bureaucracy, right? Where teaching and being part of the bureaucracy of the Newark public school system was middle class, led to the middle class for many people who participated in that. Not just teachers, but union folks and folks who had got contracts and vendors. It's a big, the school district budget in Newark is bigger than the city of Newark's municipal budget. And so where our budget was $800 million, theirs was $1 billion. And that was a number of years ago. So I'm sure it's even higher today. And so there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of contracts, it's a big bureaucracy. And there's a way of doing things, right? That people are like, well, we just need more money. We just need more money. And what we recognized was, if you look at the CCI report that came out when the state came in and took over Newark school system, they found tons of abuses. School board members who had expense accounts, right? Who could eat at some of the best restaurants in Newark, who got cars, right? Bloated contracts and vendors and contractors that were connected to the politicians in the county and in the city. It was a well-oiled machine, but the outcomes for kids weren't there. Mm-hmm. And so we knew something radical had to happen, that it wasn't going to be able to be done with traditional district schools with the state under state control. And so charter schools represented the fastest, quickest, most nimble way to really change the trajectory of education in the system. But people resisted it because it was something new and they weren't used to it. And a lot of money came in from people who are opposed to change because they're wedded to that kind of old system. Again, I'm not trying to get somebody, that system change that's going to get my mama fired or have my cousin laid off. And that's where you were. Newark is a very small town, as you know, Briana. Everyone knows each other and everybody's family. And people did not want to change. People wanted change, but they were afraid of what that change would mean in terms of the real life jobs and opportunities for them and their family members. And I can understand that.
Yeah, you talk about the charter sector and being innovative. It reminds me of magnet schools, because magnet schools were set up to be kind of like the charter, how charters are today, to thrust more innovation and to give more students opportunity at a high quality education. And then you have this iteration of charter schools that's now moved into being an innovation. Like, okay, we need to stop the status quo. There's always this longing to move away from what we've been doing since the industrial period, which I'm a proud proponent of. We definitely need to move away from it. It wasn't built for Black people.
That's right.
That we have built for white people, and it's inherently racist. And so moving away from it is A-okay with me. And that brings me to, so what do you think the next innovation within the public school sector is, and what does school choice mean to you? And so, two-part question: what's the next iteration of innovation going to be, do you think?
I think what you're going to see in the traditional districts are budgets that are growing exponentially to meet teacher contracts and collective bargaining agreements, and vendors and contractors' needs are going to be so big, it's going to break the back of the traditional district school system. And COVID is adding to that, right? So next year, most municipalities, most school districts are going to raise your taxes, right? Just to pay for the damage of COVID. But the traditional school system and the taxpayer cannot continue to pay these exorbitant rates of teachers' contracts. Now, look, I believe all teachers deserve to have a good salary. All teachers predominantly are underpaid, right? But it can't be, but it can't be at the expense of how the per pupil dollar is going to the students and what we're getting out of it. What's the bang for the buck? But those contracts are going to break it. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see folks running to the charter model and looking at how they can be cost effective, how they can do more with less, how they can look at quality for all across the board. And I think they're going to follow some of those innovative things. So I think that's what the history of the traditional district schools are. They're going to have to follow the models that the charter schools have set. Otherwise, they will be broken financially. I think your second question was, I forgot. I'm sorry. The second question was,
what is school choice? Yeah.
What does school choice mean to me? It means having the option to send my child or any parent to send their child to the best school that meets their needs. That's as simple as it is. It may be the neighborhood traditional school, right? The neighborhood traditional district school may be the best fit for your child, but I may have 3 children, and that may be the best fit for my oldest. It might not be the best fit for my other 2. Maybe a Catholic school is good for my other child, parochial school. But maybe that charter school down the street is right for my child. And it's a choice that everybody with means, everyone that has money, that lives in a nice neighborhood, right, has for their children. The politicians who war against charter schools, 95%, Briana knows this, we found this, 95% send their own children to the schools of their choice. You have actual, I haven't met one politician that didn't send their own children, their own flesh and blood, to either a private school, a parochial school, a magnet school, a charter school on the slide, right, without you knowing it, or a traditional district school, and wait for it, a well-to-do district, right? So that has been my experience with every elected official in Newark and other places. And so that's the dichotomy, right? It's okay for me, but not okay for thee. And that is why I'm a proponent of school choice, because I'm a proponent of Black folk and Latino folk and Native American folk and Asian folk, right, who have been oppressed and have too little choices in their healthcare, too little choices in where they can get good food. There are food deserts in our communities, have too little choices even where to do wash, right, in their communities. Should have the choice about what the trajectory of my kids' education should be. It should be a right. It should be a fundamental right to do because it is a right for people who have means and who live in certain other areas. And it's just simple as that. It's fairness, it's equity, and it's equality.
Wow. I 100% agree with that. I just wanted to take it a little step back because you mentioned something when Tanisha asked you, what do you think the future of school choice looks like, or just charter schools in general? And you said that you think that as it stands, that the backs of traditional schools are being broken financially, and that a lot more schools are going to adopt that charter school model. What exactly do you mean? Do you mean the charter school funding model? Do you mean the education model? Like, what do you mean by more schools are going to be able to transition into the charter school model so to save money?
So I think that's part of it. I think they'll start using the ways that charter schools purchase. Don't forget, charter schools primarily, particularly single sites, it's school-based management, right? So the school leader gets to decide the budget, gets to decide who they want to hire teacher-wise. But I also think, I think that's part of it, the economics of how to run a single site school, even a network of schools, how they're able to do more with less, because charter schools on average get 70 cents on the dollar in terms of per pupil that traditional district schools have. They get no money for facilities. And so they have to be nimble, right? If you lead a charter school, you got a nice building and you've got teachers that have got good salaries and everyone's happy, you're a damn good leader, right? Because at the end of the day, it's harder for you to do that than anybody else. But I think on another level, it's a model because particularly for Black and Latino people who are looking to start schools, right? I meet so many young people who are in education programs at Howard and other places who come out of school and say, I want to start a school. Well, guess what? You're not starting traditional district school. That's just not happening, right? There's only a few of those that go out. And in some instances, you got to know somebody and be somebody in order to become a principal of these kind of schools, right? So I'm not even going to talk about that. That's a whole other show about how you get to be principal of a school. But what I see is, I see the charter school model as being part of Black people's, particularly because I'm speaking from the Black experience. These schools can be our liberation schools. These schools can be models of self-determination in our communities. I dare say that when you look at Marva Collins in Chicago, and when she left Chicago's schools district to start Westside Preparatory, right? It was a private school. If she were alive today, she'd be starting a charter school and she'd be creating a network, right? If the Black Panthers were around today, they would be embracing charter schools, right? And starting their own Afrocentric charter schools to teach us. Why? Because the charter school model is a taxpayer model, right? That we all pay taxes. So you would create the model and you could teach what you want to teach. The only drawback is you got to have results. Who amongst us who wants to educate Black people would not take that charge and say, yeah, if my only thing I have to do is show improve of how we educate kids. We got people that talk about what Black kids need, but are lacking in how to do that, right? The NAACP should not have been coming out for moratorium from charter school. The NAACP should have been starting charter schools, right? The Urban League should be starting charter schools. The Black D9, the Divine Nine, the Black fraternities and sororities should be starting charter schools, right? The Links should be starting charter schools, right? The AME Church should have an education foundation and be starting charter schools, right? Because these schools can be schools that have principals and staff that are Black and Latino, right? We talk about the dearth of African-American men in teaching, right? These schools, you can hire your staff. You can use Black vendors and contractors to outfit your school and to fix your school. You can hire Black landscaping companies and Black food preparers in your school, right? You can control you can make your school a community development model. And why more Black people don't get that and would rather say that a Randy Weingarten can speak to Black education delivery better than the National Urban League starting charter schools or HBCU starting charter schools is beyond me. And it's a taxpayer-funded method. So I think the future of the charter school movement are more people of color grabbing the bull by the horns and starting schools, and more of our institutions and organizations grabbing the bull by the horns to do that because of the multiplicity of ripples it has in actually making our communities better. We just have to start showing people that you can do that with this model. Eva Moskowitz ain't the only one that can start a network of public schools that can educate Black kids. We can do that. And if we can't, then we're not serious about Black liberation. We're not serious about nationalism in our community. We're not serious about grabbing the means of production and doing what's best for our people.
I've been doing a lot of study on the history of Blacks in education, and Paul did a really great episode with Gerard Robinson talking about the history of education. And from the beginning, there's this line that Gerard says in that interview, and Paul, I don't know if you want to talk about it more, but he said in slave quarters there were writing tablets and pencils and where slaves were educating themselves. And then you move into, they were starting their own schools, pit schools, and then in the civil rights movement. Okay, now we have our freedom after Emancipation Proclamation, starting their own private schools when the government was not saying that we could go to public schools. And so you have time after time where Blacks were creating their own forms of schooling, and 90% of the time, well, 100% of the time, they were private schools because there was no public support, no public dollars for Blacks in the public school sector. And so it is a very great, between that and tax credit scholarships and ESAs, charters have money coming directly from the state coffers And it really is empowering. It is definitely empowering. And now I guess moving into our next question. Oh, and Briana, I don't know if you want to, but yeah, we want to talk about Senator Cory Booker. He's been he ran for president. That's, not every person runs for president. And you knew the dude, and probably you still know him. So so let's talk about Cory Booker, because I think his story and his history within the education space is very interesting. And so, yeah.
So Cory, when Cory first came to Newark, Cory did his due diligence. He looked at where the problems were, and he recognized, he did what Booker T. Washington did. He said, drop your buckets where you are and make change. And there, he got a lot of criticism for coming to Newark and wanting to make change. Newark is a very ethnocentric, very xenophobic town. If you ain't been here for 3 or 4 generations, people don't want to know you. That's why you find every politician, me included, would tell you, I'm a 3rd generation Newarker. I'm a 4th generation Newarker. I'm a 5th generation Newarker. Because that's what we look for. And so we look at askance at people who come into our town. Well, what Cory has done is Cory's been in the city of Newark, living, working, commuting, doing whatever he needed to do since 1995. And so the reality is that, he's an OG now in the city of Newark. And I thought it was very interesting that when he ran for president, he announced in front of his house, Cory Booker is the only member of the U.S. Senate who lives in an inner city neighborhood out of choice. And so the reality is that I know his heart. I know his commitment, and I know that he's serious about education. It's one of his former issues. And when he ran for president, and he could have run away from the issue of charter schools and high quality education outside of sort of traditional means, he didn't, and he doubled down on it. And I think to the extent that teachers unions and others have influence with the Democratic primary, it probably was to his detriment. But he remains someone who's committed not just to charter schools, he's committed to high quality public school options for our children. And at the end of the day, we shouldn't be as bad as the numbers are for our kids. We can ill afford to throw out any model, anything that can lead to options for our kids. To do so is actually leading to our demise. And I have to question your motives for people who do that. So Cory is continuously and at the end of the day, the reason why I thought he was a good presidential candidate is because a lot of people ran on what they would do. But here's the guy who took over a city with a failing school system. That's probably one of the fastest improving school systems in the nation. That's something you can actually hang on your window. That and the fact that he probably is the sponsor of the only piece of legislation, he and Tim Scott, that got actually signed into law by President Trump, which is criminal justice reform. And so at every level of government, I've seen Cory do things. I've seen Cory do hunger strikes. I've seen Cory, for recreation for our kids before he was mayor. I've seen him bring $1 billion of development to the city, and everything that's happening in the city of Newark now. And I give kudos to Mayor Ras Baraka. He's a dynamic mayor. But a lot of that stuff was started under the Booker administration. And I voted on a lot of those pieces. And so, he's a transformative cat. He's a transformative guy. But he's also a dude that will hang out with you while you have a drink. And he'll be a guy that tries to get you to eat vegan food alongside him along the way as well. So, I consider him a friend. I consider him a brother. And I consider him one of the foremost thinkers on education in terms of politicians in the country right now.
Great. Thank you. And so we just want to thank you for your time. And I guess we'll go into our last question, which is
wait, I have
one more question. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, on the Cory Booker topic, because I went to a private school on a tax credit scholarship. And that that changed my life. Yeah. Changed the trajectory of my life and has now impacted the life of my siblings. I'm going this weekend to my sister. She goes to a private school in Orlando. I'm from Jacksonville. Awesome. And she's on the same scholarship, and she's on she's going to a basketball school, and we're going to her tournament. I'm like, oh my gosh, we wouldn't have had these options. Like my family still couldn't afford to send her to a basketball academy in a different city. But he didn't. He came out and said he wouldn't support private school choice programs anymore. And I don't have, and I'm not sure what that was all about, but it was very interesting. I would just say that word.
Yeah.
So,
I think we all live in a political world, right? And I think we have to be honest about that. We could all talk about, cupcakes and cookies and candy, but the reality is that as a U.S. senator and a Democrat, it's hard enough to fight for public school choice. The private school choice fight, I think, is an even tougher fight. And in this terrain right now, where all choice is seen as a Trump thing, right, as a DeVos thing, it just makes it hard. People have to make choices of where they're going to fight and how they're going to fight for certain things. And so I don't think he's abandoned it, but I think he has said, look, the fight for public school choice has become such an uphill fight. Let me see if I can just invest in that. And then we can start talking about the plethora of other private school choices options that are out there going forward. I admire Tim Scott for fighting the good fight on all of it. But Tim Scott can tell you, even amongst Republicans, he can't get a real school choice bill passed while they even talk about it rhetorically that they support it. The number of Republicans who actually will put skin in the game to support that kind of bill and make it become law is scant, despite what they may say rhetorically in terms in front of a camera. And so I just think it's really about pragmatism. It's about steps. It's about the process, and that I don't think he's abandoned. I think he recognizes in this political terrain, public school choice may have to be the front thing that we try to just to keep alive and stop from like people killing before we can even bring the other plethora of other options for kids' education as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that language I can get behind, but that's not what.
I hear you. You can call him.
I wish I had his number.
Ron will give it to you, Denisha. A question for you, Ron. You brought up earlier a path to starting your own schools in your communities through charters. If I'm in a community and my schools are horrible and I'm listening to this podcast interview, and I'd say, yeah, I want to take that charter school path. Of course, you've got to get authorized. What would you recommend to a Black organization or let's say it's a Black group of parents who want to go down the charter path? Where do they go for resources, for expertise to deal with authorization?
That's excellent question, Paul. Very excellent question. I would first start with the charter school organization in your state. Louisiana has one, and a few other places have them. It's the first place. In New Jersey, it'd be the same thing. You would go to that school, that charter school organization, and say, "Hey, here I am, Paul. I want to start this school," and they'll take you through that process and tell you what you need and what you need to have, and so on and so forth. My organization actually have a pathway to how charter schools program, CSP, which is the federal funding for charter schools, what the path of that looks like when you start a charter school, what you support. It's actually an informative thing to help people understand like all the things you have to account for when you plan on starting a charter school. And if you get federal funding for it through your state, what you would be spending it on. But I also say that you should also try to get yourself into some kind of fellowship that will teach you how to run a successful school. One of the best organizations is Building Excellent Schools, which is a fellowship. It's tough to get into, but it's a great place. I know a lot of African-American leaders, particularly, who have gone through that program, that fellowship, and now run incredible charter schools across the nation. And I think that's our biggest issue, right? We have a lot of well-meaning people who start charter schools. They get in there and they're like, I don't know anything about buildings. I don't know anything about construction. I don't know anything about X, Y, and Z. They get 5 years on the clock and they don't do well in 5 years and they got to close up shop for poor performance. And you go, what happened? The Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, their alumni chapter in Detroit tried to start a charter school, Delta Prep. Great idea. Poor in terms of how they actually rolled out. And they closed up it within 2 years. That's not because these women didn't know how to run a school, but they weren't good educators, but they know how to run a charter school. And they know that 5 years goes by really quickly when you're trying to do that. So I would say learn that. But then the last thing I'll add very quickly is we need to create better pipelines for that. And that to me is the unfinished work that we need to really start talking, is how do we prepare well-meaning leaders, teachers, community activists, good organizations, HBCUs, the whole nine. How do we get from interest to actually starting a school that will be successful? How do we prepare that? It may be that we have to take a BES, a Building Excellent Schools, and just quadruple the size of it, because it obviously works, to make sure that we have what we need in terms of preparing folks not only to run good schools, run charter schools, but run schools that are going to be really successful and really community-based.
Is there a network of Black charter operators out there nationally?
There are. So I'm proud to be a board member of the National Charter Collaborative, which is the organization, if you will, for Black and Latino charter school leaders, primarily single sites throughout the country. And so it's a new organization, about 2 years old. We're in a CEO search now. And so I have a lot of faith in that organization. I'm also on the board of Diverse Charter Schools Coalition, which is headed by Sonia Park. And they bring together, again, not just Black and Latino primarily, but folks from all races and colors and creeds who run successful charter schools to network and to get better. And then there's groups, organizations that are trying to make single site schools grow into networks run by people of color, like the Charter School Growth Fund and their Emerging Leaders portfolio. And the people that are there are incredible, trying to grow what works in a single school to become a network. You know, like I said, I'm not against Eva Moskowitz. I just want some more Black and Latino and Native American folks to be just like Eva Moskowitz all around the country, doing great things with great schools, because they're there and our institutions are there to create these networks going forward. So like I said, if I can leave you with anything, it's really that these schools can be liberation models for our community. And we as charter school proponents and those in the movement have not gone to our communities and told that story and framed it in that way. Because I think when people would see that, we'd say, look, it's time to put up or it's time to shut up. Either we're serious about saving a generation of kids who are of color in this community and educationally, or we're just advocates just talking about what we need and more money, and we're going to follow the platitudes of folks who, as Denisha said, have never had the interests of our communities. When we say, let's go back to when education was great for Black people, just like make America great again, when was that? It has never educated the masses of Black and brown people or Native American people or women or LGBTQ people ever en masse. It just never has. And so while we keep investing in a system that wasn't created to educate us correctly, has proven it cannot be reformed to educate us as a mass. I'm not talking about the few that make it up to the top. As a mass, why are we trying? We should blow it up, and we should create something that we know works for our kids, and we know will educate our kids in the way that we want them to be, culturally proficient and sensitive, smart, and able to meet a world that is too often against them.
Like, I mean, I'm speechless, and all I can say is I'm so thankful to have someone who's as confident, consistent, disciplined, determined, and like have their head in the right direction in this charter space, fighting at the national level. There's a lot of conversations about accountability and who's in charge and where's the money going, and are charter schools really secret ways to privatize public education and put money in the pocket of white people? So, you know, it is very refreshing as someone who's still early in the movement and trying to learn as much as possible before, like Denisha said, we come for y'all jobs.
These jobs.
But we're trying to learn. And so when you're in this learning process, there's so many arguments, right? There's so many people saying so many different things, and we're just trying to figure out what's right and where are we going and who should be the leader and what does that look like. And I'm just thankful to have someone who's unapologetically for Black students, working nationally to fight for Black students.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You should do a whole other show about how the traditional district schools are really private.
I mean, we didn't talk about that, but the money
That's a whole other show.
Private dollars going to private pockets.
Denisha's writing that down right now.
No, I am.